This is blasphemy. This is madness.
Madness. This is Sparta!
Yo, what is up guys, this is TyrannixSwine here and welcome to another game review. This time I am reviewing Superhot, an independent slow-mo first-person shooter developed by the Superhot team. You play as a random video gamer who seems to have taken an interest in a new Superhot game that seemed to have spread around on the internet as of late. You try out a few levels and it seems like any other normal video game where you take on enemies in random levels, but however, that isn't entirely the case. Eventually, an unknown contact tells you to stop playing the game, but the more you continue, the more the consequences increase for you. Now, what I really like about Superhot's story is the fact that despite only being somewhat like only a couple hours long, it manages to do a whole lot more than what most video games even manage to do with more time than that. The game tries to bring you into a false sense of security, trying to make you feel like playing the levels are just harmless fun. But the more you play the game, and when this unknown contact, well, pretty much contacts you, everything changes and the whole dynamic of the game is just different from that point on. It becomes more of a psychological experience than some slow-mo first-person action shooter. And this sudden change is very surprising. Going into this game, I didn't know a damn thing about it other than the fact that it had slow-mo like capabilities when it came to the levels and that you had to be a bit more strategic with how you do things. But what I wasn't expecting was the dramatic change in story and how the player, the person you play as, suddenly just gives up and follows the unknown contact's orders. The game suddenly becomes something much more when this happens. And this game can be incredibly dark. There are multiple moments throughout the game where you end up meeting yourself and you do quite a bit to yourself. The first time you end up whacking yourself as a sort of message to stop playing the game, but obviously because this is a game itself, you have to carry on playing, and the unknown contact makes you kill yourself. And yeah, that's pretty dark to see. Then after that, it gets a little bit confusing with the whole fact that the unknown contact tries to act themselves up as a god or something, and you have to do their bidding and everything, trying to get into this core to release them. I think the whole thing, in the end, is that the whole game was just some sort of virus to spread a message so that it can control everyone. That's pretty much what I got from it. The Superhot went from something very simple to something very confusing, incredibly fast. That doesn't make it bad, and it has been done before in the past with other games. It's just that it was quite difficult to wrap my head around. But in the end, I liked the way the story ended up. I mean, it was a bit unexpected and surprising. I felt like there was a message here being said that was sort of like, if you play a game for too long, you end up losing yourself in them, or something like that. That's kind of what it felt like to me, or it could be entirely wrong, but there was a lot of things that ended up confusing me with how quickly this game was going, since it isn't really that long. But yeah, overall, the story managed to keep me entertained, and it was probably one of the more surprising indie games I have played for a good while. Now, let's talk about the gameplay and everything. There is about 34 levels in the main campaign itself, which, if you think about it, is quite a lot, but considering that a lot of these levels are very short, they do slowly get a bit longer over time and a bit more tactical since the game starts throwing more enemies at you at certain points. It can still be done in about about an hour or about 3 hours, depending on your skill set and your patience, of course, because of the way the mechanics work in this game. Patience and skill and tactical strategies are something you definitely need to take note of. And this game can be pretty difficult at times, especially if you're trying to rush through and not thinking about what you're doing. The way the slow-mo mechanics work is you pretty much, whenever you move, the enemy moves too, along with any bullets or projectiles coming towards you. Well, technically they slowly move towards you even if you're standing still. So depending on the way the game and the levels are, it's always best to try and think ahead, because you will die quite a few times if you make one slight mistake. Now I kind of want to speak about the slow-mo mechanic because it actually is the prime thing of this whole game, and it works very well in most cases. I think you don't really see this sort of thing in a lot of games, or any games whatsoever. This is kind of something a little bit new for once, and it was very nice and refreshing to see, especially since a lot of first-person shooters are slowly becoming the same thing over time now, since they are constantly trying to think of ideas to outdo each other. But Superhot went for a little bit of a different direction, and I really liked that. And throughout the levels themselves, there is a wide variety of different weapons you can use. There is a few selections of guns like pistols, a few shotguns, assault rifles, and stuff like that that you can use, but you aren't just limited to guns. You also have swords, you can use your own fists. There's even like objects scattered around the levels like ashtrays, like statues, and other sort of things like everyday items you just see, you can actually pick up and use them for the enemy. Very handy if you're in a sticky situation where the enemy pretty much have guns all pointed at you, and you can just pick these up and destroy them, and then they drop their guns, and then you can use them against them. It's pretty simple, but you always need to make sure you know where these objects are, because if you pretty much pick up the wrong thing and the enemy's right behind you and they're about to shoot you, you're pretty much done for. And the enemies themselves in this game are probably the most simple enemies I've ever really seen in a video game, considering that they only move when you move, but they can be quite a challenge considering where they are placed in certain levels. Like one level, for example, the way you're in an elevator surrounded by 3 dudes who all have guns pointed at you, that can be a little bit tricky to figure out. But these guys can all die in like one shot from a gun, or a couple of punches, or they just get sort of like knocked out by any objects thrown at them. They're not that difficult to get around, but it can be challenging since sometimes they'll either shoot your ass or they'll come charging at you with their bare fists. So you always need to make sure you know which dude to concentrate on when it comes to fighting out a whole freaking gang of these guys, which can be pretty difficult. And with the way the enemies are programmed, each of the levels feel very different structurally. I mean, every level, apart from the core level, because since that's an all-out shootout, you have to figure out how to defeat your enemies, since sometimes they will teleport into the map at random moments, and depending on what you have at the time, this could be very bad or good. But because of the different objects and weapons scattered around, you have a whole load of different strategies to think up of to defeat your enemies so you can clear the next level. So a lot of the times there's going to be a lot of rinse and repeat with the whole levels, depending on how much you die and how much like skill you have with the game. Another thing that really intrigued me is the way the game looked. I liked how it was just a blank white slate for each of the levels, which only give you a kind of reference to where the scenario is being held, and all you have to go up against is red blank figures. So you won't feel bad when you're playing the game at first, but when that unknown contact pretty much talks to you and makes it feel like you are actually killing real life people, then the whole thing changes and you sort of start to feel bad the more you play the game. But I like that's another thing with how the game works into tricking you into a false sense of security, thinking that it's just a harmless game, when really it isn't. The developers also made a very interesting main menu. There is actually quite a lot of stuff here, and it kind of surprised me how much there was to do in it. If you actually take a look around, you'll find out there is more to this main menu than you think. There's actually a lot of secret games you can actually play. So it's like a game within a game within a game, I think. Is that how it works? Because the developers put a lot of secret stuff in the main menu that you can actually like find and do some things with them. There's like a nice little forum area where people are talking about the game itself. I think it repeats itself, but that's I never really looked at the whole thing, but it's pretty much where some people are talking about how the game is like affecting people and all that, and they're starting to notice a pattern and everything, which is a nice little interesting detail to see. But the main menu, this is probably one of the most interactive main menus I've seen for a very good long time, if ever, to be honest. The fact that I've seen this many like sort of small games and everything like dotted around for you to figure out where they are and what they do. I feel like there's a whole load of Easter eggs here that I don't know about, but I'm sure a lot of people have already figured it out. But it was interesting to see this sort of interactivity with a main menu. I also like how there's a little porno folder somewhere where if you try to look into it, there's like a little joke thinking, you think you found something, but really it's just a joke. I really like that little bit in there. That was kind of funny. Surprisingly enough, there is actually a lot more to do than just the main story. Once you complete it, you can replay the missions, so you can like do new things or stuff like that. But there's also challenges that you can also do, and there's even an endless mode, which I think is Superhot's version of Horde mode. And I like how this game gives you more to do, which is very surprising to see. I mean, for a game that has a story that's like an hour to 3 hours long, the fact that it has more to do, it offers more than what you think, which is very surprising considering that some AAA games hardly give you anything these days. So overall, Superhot is a very interesting game. The fact that it concentrates on slow-mo mechanics and has a very dark, interesting, and disturbing psychological story to go with it, and the fact that you have more to do afterwards with challenges and an endless horde mode, and the fact that there's some nice little tidbits in the main menu, it's a very quite nicely thought out indie game, and overall I'm going to give Superhot. So, overall, that is my review of Superhot, a nice little indie game that surprised me in more ways than I actually expected. So, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Leave a like down below, subscribe, comment what you think of the game, comment what you think of other games I could do, share this video on social media, and I shall see you guys in the next random video.